All right, so today let's dive into something pretty heavy, you know?
Okay.
You know that special counsel Jack Smith report
Yeah.
that dropped right before Trump's second inauguration?
hmm
The one about his efforts to overturn the 2020 election results?
Right.
Well, we're going to unpack that today
Okay.
because it's way more than just a history lesson.
hmm
It gets into some seriously thought-provoking stuff about how our system works or maybe doesn't work as well as it should.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Smith's report wasn't just about what happened.
Right.
It was about raising questions about how close we came to a different outcome in 2020
Yeah.
and what that means for the future.
Right.
Think of it like this.
Okay.
We narrowly avoided a potential constitutional crisis.
Okay, so right off the bat, Smith says there was enough evidence to convict Trump on charges related to January 6th.
Yeah.
But then, boom, a big but hits us right in the face.
Right. And this but is rooted in something pretty deep.
Mm.
The Department of Justice has this long-standing policy that you can't indict a sitting president.
Oh, okay.
That this isn't just some random rule they made up.
Right.
It's based on the idea that criminal proceedings against a president could paralyze the executive branch and potentially be used for political purposes.
So it's meant to protect the presidency as an institution, not necessarily the individual holding the office.
Exactly.
Okay.
The thinking is that impeachment is the proper way to address potential criminal wrongdoing by a sitting president.
Got it.
Yeah.
But this policy ended up shielding Trump at least while he was in office.
Right.
Does that mean he was exonerated?
Not at all.
Okay.
Case closed.
Matt.
No. Smith's report is very clear on this.
Okay.
It explicitly states, and I'm quoting here,
Okay.
dismissal of his criminal cases does not signify complete exoneration.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of like when a detective knows who committed a crime but can't arrest them because of a legal technicality.
Okay, so if it wasn't open and shut exoneration, what roadblocks did Smith hit? I mean, you don't just drop a report like that without some serious investigation behind it.
One of the biggest obstacles was a Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity.
A Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah.
Okay.
The court, in a 6-3 decision, basically said that presidents have very broad protection from legal action while in office.
Wait, hold up. Wasn't that a ruling from the court that had 3 Trump-appointed justices?
Yeah.
Didn't that raise some eyebrows?
It definitely sparked debate about the politicization of the court.
Oh.
The timing of the ruling, right in the middle of a heated election, added fuel to the fire.
So this ruling basically tied Smith's hands.
Yes. It significantly limited his ability to pursue certain lines of investigation and use certain types of evidence.
Wow.
Think of it this way.
Okay.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but some of the pieces are off limits.
Oh, that's got to be frustrating.
Yeah.
But despite this, Smith still went ahead with the report, and he doesn't pull any punches. He basically says that Trump's actions crossed the line from rough-and-tumble politics into criminal interference with the election.
He does, and that's a really important point.
Yeah.
Smith isn't saying Trump just acted inappropriately.
Right.
He's arguing that he engaged in criminal conduct.
Whoa. That's a serious accusation.
Yeah.
And he's not just talking about Trump himself, right?
Right.
What about those unindicted co-conspirators mentioned in the report?
Yeah.
The people who helped him.
Right. Because of Trump's victory and the DOJ policy, those individuals are unlikely to face federal charges.
Oh, wow.
However,
Okay.
Smith's report does say that at least one of them could face charges, but for unrelated crimes.
Okay, so we've got potential crimes,
Yeah.
a Supreme Court ruling that limited the investigation, and a web of people involved.
Yeah.
It's starting to sound like a season of House of Cards.
It's definitely got all the elements of a political thriller,
Yeah.
but the consequences are very real, and they raise some serious questions about accountability and the future of our democracy.
And here's where it gets even more intriguing. Smith doesn't just lay out the case. He offers recommendations for how future election year investigations should be handled.
Yes, this is a crucial part of the report that often gets overlooked.
Okay.
It's like he's saying, look, we came dangerously close to a constitutional crisis, so let's learn from this and put safeguards in place.
So what's he suggesting? What should be different next time?
Well, he's really advocating for 2 main things, speed and a more aggressive approach to litigation.
Okay.
He thinks future investigations need to move much faster to prevent potential interference from dragging on and impacting an election.
Okay.
And he wants prosecutors to be more willing to go to court and fight hard, regardless of political pressure.
So basically he's saying don't let political considerations get in the way of justice.
Exactly. He believes the stakes are simply too high to let things slide.
Yeah.
He's really making a case for the importance of an independent judiciary and the rule of law.
That's pretty powerful. But here's what I don't get. If those recommendations are so important, why haven't we heard more about them?
That's a good question.
Why aren't they being debated more publicly?
And it gets to the heart of how we as a society process information.
Okay.
This report dropped in the middle of an incredibly polarized political climate.
Yeah.
People were already entrenched in their positions.
Right.
And many were simply exhausted by the constant drama surrounding Trump.
So it was almost like information overload.
Exactly.
Too much happening at once for people to absorb it all.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes this deep dive so important.
Okay.
We're taking the time to really dig into this report,
Right.
to understand its nuances, and to grapple with its implications.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines and miss the bigger picture.
Yeah.
But this report isn't just about Trump.
No.
It's about the health of our democracy and what we need to do to protect it.
Absolutely. And that's why we need to move beyond the partisan talking points.
Yeah.
And engage in a more thoughtful, nuanced discussion about what happened, why it happened, and what we can do to prevent it from happening again.
Okay, so we've got the backdrop. A potential constitutional crisis, narrowly avoided a Supreme Court ruling that limited the investigation, and a set of recommendations that seem to have gotten lost in the noise.
Right.
But this is just the tip of the iceberg. What else did Smith uncover in his investigation? What kind of evidence did he find?
Well, Smith's report is packed with details.
Okay.
And to understand the gravity of it, we need to look at the kind of evidence he gathered.
Right.
We're not talking about rumors or speculation here,
Okay.
but hard evidence.
Got it.
Emails, text messages, internal White House documents, a whole trove of information
Wow.
that painted a very clear picture of what was happening behind the scenes.
So like a digital trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to the Oval Office.
Precisely.
Okay.
And what those breadcrumbs reveal is a coordinated effort to pressure state officials to spread misinformation and ultimately to try to overturn the will of the voters.
Okay. I'm starting to see why this is a bigger deal than just a typical political squabble. We're talking about the very foundation of our democracy here.
Exactly. The peaceful transfer of power is something we often take for granted. But this episode shows how fragile it can be.
So what were some of the specific things Smith found? Can you give me an example?
Sure, one example that stands out is the pressure campaign on state officials, particularly in states where the election results were close.
Okay.
Smith's report details how Trump and his allies personally contacted these officials,
Wow.
urging them to find enough votes to swing the election in his favor.
Wow, that's pretty brazen. I mean, contacting officials directly and asking them to manipulate the vote count, that's not just bending the rules, it's trying to break them.
Exactly. And remember, this was happening against the backdrop of a massive misinformation campaign alleging widespread voter fraud.
Right.
A campaign fueled by Trump himself.
So it wasn't just about the pressure on officials, but also about creating this atmosphere of distrust in the electoral process.
Right. It was about sowing doubt in people's minds, making them question the legitimacy of the election, and undermining faith in democracy itself.
And this misinformation campaign wasn't limited to backroom deals or private phone calls.
Right.
This was playing out in the public eye on social media, at rallies, even in official statements from the White House. It's pretty scary to think how close we came to a complete breakdown in our system.
It really is. And it underscores the importance of critical thinking, media literacy, and being able to discern fact from fiction.
So we've got the pressure on officials, the misinformation campaign, and then, of course, there's January 6th. I mean, you can't talk about this report without addressing what happened at the Capitol.
Absolutely. Smith's report dedicates a significant portion to the events of January 6th,
Okay.
analyzing the role Trump played in inciting the violence and the potential legal implications of his actions.
And what's his conclusion on that front? Does he believe Trump's words directly led to the attack?
He stops short of explicitly saying that.
Okay.
But he does lay out a very compelling case for how Trump's rhetoric, his repeated claims of a stolen election, and his calls for his supporters to fight like hell created the conditions for the violence to occur.
It's like he lit the match even if he didn't directly start the fire.
That's a good analogy, and it gets to the complexity of assigning legal responsibility in a situation like this.
Right.
But what's clear from Smith's report is that the events of January 6th weren't just a spontaneous outburst of anger.
Yeah.
They were the culmination of a months-long campaign to undermine the election and delegitimize the incoming administration.
Wow, so this wasn't just about one election. This is about something much bigger, a deliberate attempt to erode trust in the very process by which we choose our leaders. It's pretty unsettling.
It is, and it raises some profound questions about the future of our democracy.
Right.
If something like this could happen once, what's to stop it from happening again?
That's the big question, isn't it? But before we get too lost in the doom and gloom, let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier, those recommendations Smith lays out in his report.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about what he specifically proposes.
Sure, he offers a whole range of recommendations, but I think they can be grouped into three main categories.
Okay.
Strengthening election security,
Okay.
enhancing transparency,
Sure.
and bolstering accountability.
Okay, let's unpack those one by one.
Sure.
First up, election security. What does he suggest doing to make our elections more secure?
Well, one of his key recommendations is to standardize election procedures across all states.
Okay.
Right now, we have a patchwork system where each state has its own rules and regulations.
And that can create confusion, inconsistencies, and opportunities for manipulation, right?
Exactly. So Smith proposes establishing national standards for things like voter registration, absentee voting, and vote counting. This would help to ensure a more uniform and secure process across the board.
That sounds like a good idea in theory, but wouldn't it be difficult to get all 50 states to agree on a single set of rules?
It would definitely be a challenge, especially in our current political climate.
Yeah.
But Smith argues that it's essential for protecting the integrity of our elections.
Right.
And he points to other areas where we have national standards like driver's licenses or air traffic control as examples of how it can work.
That's a fair point. Okay, so standardized procedures, what else is on the table?
He also calls for investing in modernizing our voting infrastructure.
Okay.
This includes things like upgrading voting machines, improving cybersecurity measures, and making sure polling places are accessible and well-equipped.
I can see how that would make sense. Outdated technology and vulnerable systems create opportunities for hacking and interference, which can undermine confidence in the results.
Exactly. And it's not just about preventing outside interference. It's also about making sure that every eligible voter can cast their ballot easily and securely.
Okay, so we've talked about standardizing procedures and modernizing infrastructure.
No.
What about transparency? How does Smith propose we make the electoral process more transparent?
Well, one of his key recommendations here is to increase transparency in campaign financing.
Okay.
He argues that we need to shine a light on where campaign money is coming from and how it's being spent.
That makes sense. Opaque funding can make it hard to trace the origins of influence and potential corruption.
Exactly. So he proposes strengthening disclosure requirements for campaign donors and requiring campaigns to provide more detailed accounting of their expenditures.
Okay.
This would help to ensure that voters have a clear understanding of who is funding campaigns and how that money is being used to influence their votes.
It's all about empowering voters to make informed decisions, right? To know who's pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Precisely, another area where he calls for greater transparency is in the vote counting process.
Okay.
He proposes requiring all states to conduct post-election audits to verify the accuracy of the results.
So like a double check to make sure everything adds up. I guess that would help to address concerns about potential fraud or irregularities.
Right. And he also suggests making the audit process more transparent so that the public can have confidence in the results.
Okay, so we've covered election security and transparency. What about accountability? What does Smith propose to hold individuals accountable for trying to interfere with elections?
Well, he advocates for strengthening existing laws and creating new ones specifically tailored to address election interference.
Okay.
He argues that the current legal framework is inadequate to deal with the range and sophistication of the threats we face.
So he's saying we need to update our laws to keep pace with the changing landscape of election interference.
Exactly. And he also calls for stricter penalties for those who engage in these activities to send a clear message that attempts to undermine our democracy will have serious consequences.
So essentially he's saying, let's make it clear that attempts to undermine our democracy will have serious consequences. But wouldn't that require a lot of political will, something that seems to be in short supply these days?
Absolutely. Implementing these recommendations would require a bipartisan effort, something that seems unlikely in the current political climate.
That's disheartening, but it's also a stark reminder of the challenges we face.
Yeah.
We can have the best recommendations in the world, but if there's no political will to act on them, then they're just words on paper.
That's true. But I think it's important to remember that Public opinion can influence political decisions.
Right.
The more people who are aware of these recommendations and demand action from their elected officials, the more likely it is that we'll see some progress.
So it's not just about waiting for politicians to act, it's about citizens raising their voices and demanding change.
Exactly. We
Okay.
can't just sit back and hope for the best.
Right.
We have to be active participants in shaping the future of our democracy.
This whole conversation has been a real eye-opener. We started by talking about the potential crimes detailed in Smith's report, then we delved into the evidence he uncovered, and now we've explored his recommendations for safeguarding our elections. It's clear that this report is much more than just a legal document. It's a roadmap for how we can strengthen our democracy.
I agree, and I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about the 2020 election or even about Donald Trump.
Right.
This is about ensuring that our democratic institutions are resilient enough to withstand any future attempts to undermine them, regardless of who is in power.
That's a powerful message. But amidst all this talk about potential crimes and safeguarding elections, there's a human element to this story that I think is important to acknowledge.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm thinking about the people whose lives were directly impacted by the events detailed in Smith's report, the election officials who were harassed and threatened the poll workers who were falsely accused of fraud, the voters whose faith in democracy was shaken, and the families of those who were injured or killed on January 6th.
You're right. It's easy to get lost in the legal and political complexities of this story, but we shouldn't forget the human cost.
And I think it's important to remember that these individuals are not just abstract figures in a political drama. They're real people with real lives, and their experiences deserve to be heard and acknowledged.
Absolutely. Their stories are a powerful reminder of the stakes involved in this conversation.
Right.
We're not just talking about abstract principles or legal theories. Here, we're talking about the lives and livelihoods of our fellow citizens.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, potential crimes, evidence recommendations, and the human cost of what happened. But there's one more piece of the puzzle I want to explore: Smith's personal reflections on leading this investigation. What insights does he offer? It seems like leading this investigation must have been incredibly intense. Knowing the weight of the situation, the potential consequences. Did he talk about what that was like?
He did in the report's conclusion. Smith actually steps back from the legal analysis and shares some personal reflections. He talks about the pressure he felt, the awareness that his decisions could have a ripple effect on the entire country.
Yeah.
He knew he was walking a tightrope, trying to uphold the law while also navigating the political minefield surrounding the investigation.
That makes it. This wasn't just some ordinary case. This
Right.
was about a former president, about the very foundation of our democracy.
Yeah.
How did he deal with that pressure?
He talks about the importance of staying focused on the facts and the law,
Okay.
of not letting the outside noise influence his judgment.
Right.
He emphasizes the need for impartiality,
Mm-hmm.
for setting aside personal opinions and political leanings to conduct a thorough and objective investigation.
That must have been incredibly difficult, especially given how polarized things were and still are.
Yeah.
Did he talk about how he managed to stay neutral amidst all that chaos?
He emphasizes the importance of building a strong team,
Okay.
a team of dedicated professionals who shared his commitment to the rule of law. He talks about creating a culture within the investigative team where everyone felt empowered to speak their minds, to challenge assumptions, and to ensure that every decision was based on evidence, not on political expediency.
So it sounds like he was very aware of the need to create a sort of bubble around the investigation to protect it from outside influence and ensure that it remained focused on the truth wherever that might lead.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the key takeaways from this report.
Okay.
It's a reminder that the rule of law, the idea that everyone is subject to the same laws and that those laws are applied fairly and impartially, is essential for a functioning democracy.
But it's not enough to just have laws on the books.
Right.
You need people who are willing to uphold those laws, even when it's difficult, even when it's unpopular.
Yeah.
People like Jack Smith and his team.
Absolutely. Their work is a testament to the importance of integrity, of professionalism, and of a commitment to justice.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in upholding those values.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to feel powerless when we see things like this happening, like our democracy is slipping away.
Right.
But this report and the work of people like Jack Smith reminds us that we're not powerless. We have a voice, and we have a responsibility to use it.
I agree, whether it's staying informed about the issues, participating in the political process, or simply having conversations with friends and family about these important topics, we can all make a difference.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth reflecting on the journey we've taken together.
Yeah.
We started by exploring the potential crimes outlined in Smith's report, delved into the evidence he uncovered, and then examined his recommendations for strengthening our democracy. We even touched on the human cost of what happened and the personal reflections of the man who led the investigation. It's been a lot to process, but I think it's been a worthwhile endeavor.
I agree, this report isn't just about the past, it's about the future.
Right.
It's a call to action for all of us to be more engaged, more informed, and more committed to the principles of our democracy.
And it's a reminder that democracy is a fragile thing, something that requires constant care and attention. We can't take it for granted. We have to actively participate in its preservation.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it sparked some important conversations and inspired you to be an active participant in our democracy. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay hopeful.